This incident took place on August 23, 2001. An Air Transat Airbus A330 was being prepared to depart from Toronto for Lisbon. It was a 7-hour non-stop flight, so the aircraft was loaded with 48 metric tons of fuel. After all preparations were completed, boarding began. According to local time, it was 9 p.m. Flight 236 carried 293 passengers and 13 crew members, including 2 pilots. The flight captain, 48-year-old Robert Piché, had over 16,000 hours of flight experience. The first officer, 28-year-old Doug Deager, had 5,000 hours of flying experience, out of which 400 hours were specifically on the Airbus A330. The aircraft itself was a state-of-the-art Airbus A330, only 2 years old. In short, there was no shortage of pilot experience and no fault in the aircraft. After completing all flight checks, the pilots taxied Flight 236 to the runway and took off with ATC's clearance. After takeoff, they set course for Lisbon, flying across the Atlantic Ocean. Within minutes, the aircraft climbed to its cruising altitude of 39,000 feet. On long flights like this, pilots usually don't have much to do since the autopilot handles most of the work. The pilots mainly monitor the instruments and stay in contact with the control tower for updates. 4 hours had passed since takeoff. Everything was running smoothly, and most of the passengers were asleep since it was nighttime. The plane was now in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, and that's when things started to go wrong. At around 1 a.m. Canadian time, the pilots noticed an abnormal reading on the right engine. The oil pressure was higher than normal, the oil quantity was low, and the oil temperature was also unusually low. This type of error was something the pilots had never seen before in their entire careers. They immediately opened the flight manual to find out what could be causing it. Normally, when an aircraft is in flight, oil temperature increases over time, but here, it was showing a decrease, which was highly unusual. They couldn't find any information about this error in the manual, so the pilots contacted Air Transat's maintenance control in Canada and reported the issue. Unfortunately, the maintenance team was also unfamiliar with this error. They advised the pilots to keep monitoring the situation, saying they would get back to them shortly. Even though the engine readings looked suspicious, the plane was still performing normally. The pilots assumed it might just be a faulty sensor giving incorrect data. However, about 30 minutes later, another advisory message appeared, and this time, it was not about oil, but about fuel. In commercial airliners, fuel is distributed equally between both wings. The pilots noticed that the right wing fuel tank had less fuel than the left wing tank. Normally, this isn't a major issue since it can be corrected during flight. To balance it out, the captain opened the cross-feed valve, which allowed fuel from the left tank to flow into the right. Within minutes, the fuel levels were equal again. But just 10 minutes later, the captain received another warning: low fuel. This was a nightmare scenario for any pilot, especially on a plane full of passengers. The pilots checked again and saw that the fuel in the right tank had dropped once more, and now the combined fuel in both wings wasn't enough to reach Lisbon. At that point, the situation was critical. In the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, there weren't many options for diversion. In fact, they had only one possible destination: the Azores Islands. These islands are part of Portugal, located in the Atlantic Ocean, and one of them, Terceira Island, had an airport. The captain immediately contacted Santa Maria ATC and informed them that they were diverting to Terceira due to a fuel emergency. But even then, the pilots weren't sure if they would make it to the island, or if they would have to ditch the plane into the ocean.